In the bustling world of business, you're either moving forward or falling behind. Welcome to For Action Takers Only, the podcast and Facebook group where dreams become reality. We're here to fuel your ambition, sharpen your skills, and inspire your entrepreneurial spirit. Dive into the sea of opportunities with our insightful discussions, expert advice, and powerful success stories. From investment strategies to business building tips, we've got it all. Are you ready to take your first step towards your dream life? Join us on this exciting journey, unleash your potential, and watch as your dreams transform into your reality. Remember, inaction is the enemy of progress. So get on the action train with For Action Takers Only. Because the time to act is now and the place to start is here. For those who dare to dream and have the courage to act, the world is their oyster. For Action Takers Only, where dreams meet action. Tune in, take action, and transform your life. Your future self will thank you.
And welcome to For Action Takers Only. This is a podcast for serial entrepreneurs, real estate investors, and anyone taking action and living the life they intend to. Today, I'm your host, Todd Kirchhoff, by the way, and I started this podcast as a homework assignment from Pace Morby to get out there and do some networking and build a personal brand. So just kind of like it and stuck with it. So if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe. We can use this support. Today, I got a guest, Casey Gregersen. He's a visionary entrepreneur. He's also a real estate investor, a syndicator, and a petroleum engineer with a track record of buying and selling multiple franchises and successfully investing in real estate across Wyoming. He's bought a bunch of houses there. Casey has proven himself to be a formidable force in the business world, all while maintaining a full-time role at Shell while he built this up. His journey is a testament to the power of hard work, strategic thinking, and a relentless pursuit of one's dreams. Please welcome Casey Gregersen.
Hey, Todd. How we doing?
Hey, Casey. How you doing?
Doing great.
Yeah. So tell me, how did you get started in this entrepreneurial world that you're in now?
Yeah, you bet. It was funny. I was talking to somebody else about this because you're always like, hey, did you have like parents that were entrepreneurs? Definitely not. I had a dad that was he was definitely always a W-2 guy. And when I remember I was sharing the story earlier, never forget the time when he came home, because he worked for the city. He was an attorney. He was a city attorney for Sheridan for a long time. And I remember when he first had to branch out and, or he'd actually just left that job and he hadn't signed up or hadn't taken another job with another law firm. And he was like having to do it on himself. He had his own private practice. And I remember him being scared to death. And, but it's weird because it like didn't necessarily shape me because I'm to this day, I've always just thought differently. Right. And I worked for Shell in oil and gas for 12 years and I can go down that rabbit hole, that story. But the long story short is I was able to, while working that job, I had the luxury of working for 2 weeks in the field and then I'd have 2 weeks off. And during those 2 weeks, I wouldn't have to do anything. I didn't have to touch a cell phone. Didn't have to open a work laptop or do anything. So during those 2 weeks, that's when I found out, hey, that's when I got the taste of entrepreneurship, right? I bought my first rental property, started buying fix and flips, bought into some franchises. And yeah, once I got that taste of being an entrepreneur, it was hard to kick.
So Shell Oil, so 12 years. And you said you were out. What was your job with Shell?
Yeah, you bet. So if anybody in the audience has seen the series Landman, that was my job, literally. So I'm a petroleum engineer by degree. And when I first started for Shell, I was on the drilling engineering team. And we would go design the wells. And this part's kind of cool, right? They don't talk as much about this in Landman, if you guys watch that. But what we would do is we were hired to design these horizontal wells, right? We would, if you picture, right, you drill like you're out in West Texas or you're even in the Gulf of Mexico and you're sitting on a platform and you got to go down 3,000 or 10,000 foot of water down to get at the seabed. But regardless, let's say you start at the surface and we would drill down, you drill down to like 8,000 feet. And then for another like 4,000 feet, you do what's called a curve where you'd kick off. So you'd be drilling with this drill bit, you'd kick off and you'd be drilling like a big curve, right? And then you'd land it out horizontal. And then we would drill wells, these like laterals for like another 10,000 feet, like out, right? Like sometimes 10 to 15,000 feet horizontally, right through the ground, right? So we were designing these wells and initially I was just in the office designing them. And then when we went out to the field, we got to go execute, and we got to be the company man out there on the rig that's like making the calls and in charge of everybody, right? And drilling these wells, taking demands from back in Houston. And yeah, so it was kind of a cool job. I loved it. It was super technical, and it's pretty crazy what we did out there.
That sounds crazy. I sell drones to oil and gas. So I fly drones and sell them, and we sell an OGI, optical gas leak detection sensor. So it's pretty interesting stuff. But so while doing that, where did you get the bug to start your own business or get into real estate? Where did that come along?
Absolutely. So being out there for 2 weeks, right? Again, I would keep coming back to this. If you could picture out, I'm on these roads, these dangerous roads. I'm away from my family, right? I think that's the one, if you watch that series, they depict it really well about the kind of sacrifices you make when you're out there working in the oil fields, right? So I started asking myself, like, man, but what, as much as I like this, what if I didn't have to be away from my family, right? What if I could be home with my kids every day? What if I could be building a life and building a career where I could be there for the important stuff for my kids, right? So that was the first kind of driver, because I started asking that question. And so I'm like, well, let's do something about it, right? So one of the first things I did was, I had bought my first rental property in 2010 when I was going to college at the University of Wyoming. Longer story, but I'll give you the cliff notes. My dad actually helped co-sign with me. I was just like 22, 23 at the time. He co-signed. We used some money from my college savings, and we got the down payment and bought that first property, right? But I didn't take a whole lot of action on that for 4 or 5 years. I just kept the rental property. I kept renting it out, didn't sell it, luckily. And then I read, like a lot of people, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and that's when it clicked, right? And then I realized, that's an asset that I own. And if I buy more assets, I can get back my time and build this, start to really build my wealth, right? So I read that book, and then that took me down the rabbit hole of like bigger pockets and reading as much as I could. And again, but I had the luxury of being out in the field, right? So picture this, I'm out in West Texas driving around, right? There's a lot of, we call it windshield time. There's a lot of time where you're just cruising around, driving to leases. And I'm sitting there behind the windshield. And for a while there, I was listening to whatever. I'd listen to the music or listen to a sports game or ESPN radio, right? But then I'm like, I could be doing more with my time, right? So I started listening to books and podcasts. So I'm learning all this stuff in the field. And then when I'm getting off for 2 weeks, then I'm going out and finding houses to fix up and flip, right? So being able to like learn it all, like listening to it audibly, right? And then being able to apply it on my off days, it was like this like perfect like storm of like learning and putting it into action and iterating. And then, yeah, it was game on. Once I did my second property and my third, I'm like, all right, I want to do more of this.
So is that what you started with then, buying real estate?
Yep. Yeah. So I bought the second one from that first one. And I always like telling this story, right? I took the money from the first one. I just did a cash out refinance like 5 years later, pulled out $50K. And then I went and bought another property. And these are both in Laramie, Wyoming. It's a college town. And this second property, I'm like, this is undervalued. It's under-rented. It was renting out for $700 before I bought it. And it was like, I could literally throw a baseball for the yard and hit the campus of University of Wyoming. So great location. By the time I'm like, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to fix it up and refinance it. And by the time I was done, I had just used that $50K, put into a second property. And now I was renting that house out for $2,600 a month. Right. So we went from $700 to $2,600. And what that meant by the time I paid my mortgage, taxes, and insurance, I was making $1,000 a month of cash flow. And like, that was like a big one for me. I'm like, all right, I literally didn't use any cash. I just took out cash from an existing asset, bought another asset, and now I'm making $1,000 a month in cash flow. So I'm like, whew, how do we do more of these? Right. And then, then the kind of second piece is, so that was the second one. And obviously I'm like, all right, game on, let's go buy more. But what really, I think, really got the momentum going was I actually bought into a franchise, right? So my wife was really passionate about this Pure Barre studio. It was this women's fitness studio.
Okay.
Right? So she wanted to buy one, and we were moving back to Midland from Montana at the time, into Midland, Texas. And she's like, Casey, I don't want to go. I'll go, but I don't want to, I'm going to miss Pure Barre. Like, I can't lose Pure Barre. I'm like, well, let's look in the franchise. So we actually opened a franchise in Midland, Texas, and it was really successful. And at one point we were trying to scale that and grow that, but we realized that it was a tough business to scale. But what we learned all about running a business, right? I learned all about sales and marketing and payroll. And when you're trained as a drilling engineer for Shell, it's very technical, great training. But what they don't train you is how to do sales and marketing, right? So I got this sort of baptism by fire, right? I got my MBA from the School of Hard Knocks, owning a business, right? So what I was able to really do was, even though we've sold those since, I learned how to build a company, market, do sales, right? And then what I did, just to pour gasoline on the fire, I took those learnings and applied it into my real estate company, right? And that's how we started finding off-market deals, right? Managing contractors, doing property management, all that in-house. It really came from sort of the training grounds of running the franchise.
Okay, so it says I saw on your website you've done a couple franchises. What were some of the other ones?
Yeah, it was actually just one concept. It was all Pure Bar, but we bought multiple locations. So at one point we owned 6 or 7 of them, spanning from Houston to Midland all the way out to San Diego. And yeah, at one point we were like, hey, it was kind of the private equity model, right? That was actually initially our plan, was to go accumulate a lot of these, build them up, make them all really profitable and sell it to private equity. But we found that it's really an owner occupied model, right? Or owner, like it worked great on our first studio. When we were in the studio, me and my wife were driving it, right? The clients could relate to us. It was very successful, but trying to scale that was difficult.
Okay, so let me ask you, how did you come across Pace Morby and Sub 2?
You bet. Oh man, where did I first? That's a great question. I've never actually been asked that. I mean, I think I had to have seen him, and you know what? I had listened to him on Bigger Pockets, and I think I'd seen him on some social media stuff. But I think the bigger one was, like, I've been listening to Bigger Pockets for years, and then I heard he was like co-hosting, and I was listening to him talk, and the way he was presenting like Sub 2 or whatever it was at the time. And like, I just love listening to guys that, like, I mean, anybody at Bigger Pockets I love listening to, but Pace, there was something different, right?
Yeah.
And then I had the opportunity where I actually had another business partner was like, hey, he was thinking about joining Sub 2, so we ended up doing the same thing. And when I immersed myself into that and started listening to him, I'm like, all right, this is like, yeah, I just related to it, right? And I was a closer myself, and I was like going on appointments, doing direct to seller, doing all these different things in real estate, right? But when I was able to start to listen to Pace, it was like, again, it was more gasoline on the fire, right? It's like, now I'm equipping myself with all these other additional exit strategies, which allowed me to like ramp up my marketing even more, because now I used to market just for like cash deals, right? I was trying to be a wholesaler, or at least find some deals to fix and flip, but I only had a couple tools in my tool belt. And I had read some books on like no money down and seller finance, right? But I hadn't really perfected it. And when I started to dive into Sub 2, I got all these new tool bells in my tool belt, and now I could do more marketing, because that was that many more leads that I could convert on, right? I wasn't just now a cash buyer and buying it 70 cents on the dollar. I could buy it 85% on a novation, or 100% on a seller finance, right?
Mm-hmm. So, how many properties do you own now? And most of them are in Wyoming, correct?
You bet. Yep. So yeah, honestly, all but like 2 actually are in Wyoming. We've got a couple in Montana. I lied. We also have some in Texas. It's a couple here in Houston. I always forget about those. They're here in the backyard. They're medium-term rentals, and they do great. But I'm a lot more bullish on Wyoming right now, just because Texas taxes are tough. Insurance is tough down here. But Wyoming, I still get really good cash flow, and it's growing and appreciating. So yeah, we've doubled down and went all in, and we've got around 250 units, but we're still growing. We've got an LOI out, actually as of yesterday, on 120 units complex in Wyoming. So we're excited to be looking at more bigger multifamily, and still doing a lot of fix and flip.
Okay, so you're starting to focus in on multifamily now, as in commercial. Or are you doing commercial also?
We haven't. I mean, we'll look at those deals. Again, the way I look at it is like, I do a lot of direct to seller marketing, right? And I want to monetize every lead I can. So I'll look at the commercial stuff. And if it penciled out and made sense, I know a lot of guys who are having a lot of success there. So we would still look at it, but our bread and butter is the single family all the way up to large multifamily. And then if we can ever fix and flip it, any one of the above, like, we'll do that, right? Like, if we could go create cash now in a strong market, let's do that, because that snowballs, right? You can take those, just like I did when I was working for 12 years for Shell. We were doing deals. If we could sell it and make money on it, right? That was money we could put back into the business and continue to grow, right? That allowed us to go hire another person or buy another rental property, right? So it's always about that kind of the velocity of cash.
Okay. So why and how did you, why and how? Well, Wyoming. Why did you choose Wyoming to go buy a bunch of properties there? You said part of it because of cash flow here, taxes and stuff isn't really good. The insurance is really high here. But how did you get started in Wyoming?
You bet. I mean, so I grew up in Sheridan, Wyoming. Lived there for 18 years. Went to college. Actually, did my undergrad in Montana. Then went to grad school in Laramie in Wyoming. So I always knew the market. And yeah, I mean, this is such a good question. I get it all the time, right? So it really, to answer it, I joined so let's say up to like 2019, I was finding deals up in Wyoming and in Texas. We're buying from wholesalers or we're buying on the market. But in Wyoming, there were no wholesalers, right? I was like, man, I got all these wholesalers in Houston and DFW all over Texas, and they could bring me deals. And I was thinking about doing it myself, but I'm like, I wish I just had, because I was looking at the numbers and the returns I was getting in Wyoming. I'm like, I just wish I could have had a wholesaler in Wyoming to buy from. Well, I'm like, well, I could wait around for somebody else to do it, or I could go figure it out myself. So I joined another mastermind. It was called REI Game Changers with Alan and James Hodges, a couple great guys out in Midland, Texas, actually. And I joined their program. And yeah, I mean, at the time it was like 11 grand. And I thought that was a lot. I'm like, oh man, are you kidding me? I'm going to invest $11,000 for your training course. But oh my gosh, I had to close one deal and I've closed hundreds since. And they taught me the process of like how to do direct to seller marketing, how to do a mailer, how to set up your calls, how to set your CRM, right? How to set appointments, close deals, right? Negotiate. They taught me all that. And what I found was, to answer your question kind of a roundabout way, is it was also a mastermind, right? When I'll never forget this, going to Midland, I was surrounded by several other investors doing the same thing, learning just like me and wholesaling in different markets across the country, right? And I was sharing our KPIs and like how much money we were making based on how much marketing I was doing and what our return was. And people were like, holy cow, those returns are great. Like your marketing spend is going way farther than it is in these big markets. Because I was living in Houston at the time, and my thought was Wyoming or Houston, which one? I'm like, well, let's do Wyoming. There's no wholesalers, right? And so I did that, and I'm like, I was always going to go wholesale in Houston was my idea. But I remember my mentors, they're like, Casey, like you could do one, like you're very capable. You could probably do Houston, but I'm telling you, it's a different game. And what you have in Wyoming is unique. There's very little competition, right? You're not having to bid against a bunch of other people. You're kind of the only one in the market. Like I would milk that for everything you have, right? So that was why I made the decision then. I'm like, all right, I'm going to double down and I'm going to ramp up our marketing and I'm going to be the best and I'm going to go statewide and we're going to be the number one home buyer in Wyoming.
And are you?
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. Today, I mean, depends on what KPI or metric you're doing, but just based on sheer volume, like we've done over like 60 deals in the last couple, like per year of the last couple of years. And this year our goal is to do 100 of them. So yeah, Wyoming's small. There's not a whole lot of other cash buyers. I mean, the blessing and the curse, right? The blessing is everything I've just said, low competition. We find better deals. We can get cheaper cost per lead up there and cheaper cost per acquisition. But on the flip side, it's a lot more difficult to wholesale. Like this year, if we wholesale 20%, I'll be pretty happy. But the rest of those we're having to fix and flip ourselves, close on our own, buy through my fund. So it's really turned into a capital game because, again, there's not a bunch of cash buyers, but the retail market is strong. There's still plenty of people who want to live there. There's actually way more people that want to live there than houses. So that's what's created a lot of stability and growth. That's really where it's been at.
So I got to ask you, did you find it hard to like you're an engineer. Did you find it hard shifting into sales and negotiating and learning all those things?
Man, you would think so. And this is the other story. I share this with other people all the time. I remember reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I'll never forget this one too. I'm driving down I'm in Alberta, Canada, driving down these random roads, back country, oil and gas leases. And I'm reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad for the first time. And he's talking about driving door to door, right? And doing like vacuum or some sort of door to door sales, right? Everybody remembers their first vacuum salesman, right? And I did at the time. And I'm like, I've never done that. I've never had to sell anything. Like that's scary to me. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I wish somebody would have made me do that. And I wish I would have learned it because like, I don't have that skill set. And so I didn't get it for a while, but as mentioned, when we opened the franchise, it was like sink or swim and we figured it out. And I quickly realized this was a hidden superpower I didn't even know I had. Right. And now looking back, I realized I always kind of had that, right? Because I've always been like I've always been a problem solver. And I've always been like, when people say, no, there's no way to do that, I'm like, well, wait, is there? Have we exhausted all options? Is there a creative way to do this? Right? Can we still solve the problem? Right? And I'm better, like, I'm okay with rejection. Right? Again, and I just want to help solve people's problems. Right? So I found that once I got into sales and I started helping people, I was like, wow, this is my calling. Right? And today, this is my superpower and my avatar. When people ask, hey, what are you best at, Casey? What's your superpower? And I say, it's being a closer, because I just love getting on the phone, building rapport, and solving people's problems, right? But if I hadn't like pushed myself into it, I guess, yeah, I'd probably still be an engineer and not even know.
Well, I mean, that's kind of engineering in a sense. Your problem solving is engineering. I mean, you're just doing it in a different aspect. It's more mechanical. What kind of engineer were you? Mechanical?
Yeah, petroleum engineer.
All petroleum. So did you find the gas, or did you build the rigs?
Yeah, we were, I mean, and this is funny too, like going to school for 2 years, I studied reservoir engineering, right? My research project was about injecting chemicals and different stuff you would pump it down through a well into the ground, and it would hopefully push out more oil so you could produce more oil, right? It was it's called like reservoir engineering. And it was all about producing more oil, versus when I started for Shell, it was all about how do we drill wells the fastest and the cheapest, right? We used to call deepest and cheapest, right? That was the kind of motto with Shell. And then I also worked on the frack side, where we'd go in there and we'd be fracking these wells and trying to get as much production out of them as we could, right? So, but none of that I ever translated, right? There was really nothing I learned in college that I actually applied to the job. They really just taught you how to study and how to think through, but again, how to problem solve, how to be able to use Excel, and still to this day, that's probably one of the best skill sets I learned in grad school, was like how to manipulate and use Excel. Because if you know how to use Excel, you can do a lot of underwriting and you can make a lot of sound decisions if you can stick to the numbers.
Right. So, all right, as an entrepreneur who wears multiple hats, how do you continue to learn and grow your skills across these different industries? How are you continuing to grow?
Absolutely. I think, man, being in these it's not hard. Honestly, it could be a curse at times, because I'm like, I love learning new stuff. I love surrounding myself with people doing different things, whether it's in Sub 2 or Owners Club, or I'm part of Collective Genius. And yeah, that's the problem, is I go to these Collective Genius, for example, we meet 4 times a year, and I go there and you learn from all these other people that are doing it at a high level. And I'm like, oh, it's like, we could do that. I could figure that out. We could do land development. We could do new construction. We could go do co-living. We could do Section 8. We could look at all these awesome strategies in real estate. Like, I want to do all of them, right? So I think always just learning from other people has always challenged me. And now again, my challenge is, how do we stay laser focused on what we're best at and get really good at that before we go layer upon something else?
Okay. So when did you finally leave Shell?
Yeah, great question. And then if I could tell a little bit of a story with it, I left. No stories. Yeah.
No stories.
Yep. It was about 2.5 years ago. And there's a longer story if you guys have to go watch maybe one of my YouTube or Instagram videos, when I talk about like how leaving my kids, like when I first went out to the rig. I'm gonna tell you a different story, but you guys want to go listen to that. That's one of the best ones. When I was going out to the rig for like 4 weeks and going into quarantine in a hotel. I had to sit in a hotel for 7 days, and I had to leave my son. And I'll give you the cliff notes. But I had to leave, and he was so like, he'd been used to me. I used to work in the field when he was younger, but then I was home for a couple of years, and he got used to me being home every night. And now I had to go back out to the field, and I was going to be gone for 4 weeks. And it was one of the worst things ever. We left that night, or I had to leave that night, and really, really hard to leave. And I got back on the road, and I'm driving down the interstate right between here and Houma, Louisiana. Never forget it. And my wife calls, and she's like, hey, how's everything going? We're just talking about the drive. And she's like, well, I don't know if you saw this, but your son, he chased after the car, and I had to go chase him like 2 blocks down the street before I finally caught him. I'm like, Colt, you can't go with him. He's got to go. Right. And she told me this, and it just broke my heart. And it was the hardest thing was, I was about to go into like 4 weeks indefinite away from the kids, right? Away from all of them. I didn't even know how long I'd be gone, because you were flying out for this project in the Gulf of Mexico, and you're waiting on a helicopter to come pick you up. And again, there were some cool things we did out there, right? But but being gone that long was so hard. And this was the beginning of my, what you call like my hitch, right? So I just remember at that time, I'm like, oh man, like I want to create something to where I don't have to make that decision, because I didn't have a choice at that time. I had to go work, right? And that's what really drove me to work. I just doubled down in real estate, right? I spent the next 7 days in quarantine because we had to take a test, a COVID test day one, and pass another test 5 to 7 days later before we could even go out on the helicopter. So we're locked down in isolation in this hotel. I'm like, I'm going to maximize every minute in here, and I'm going to build my real estate business and do whatever I can to where if I'm faced with this opportunity down the road, I want to be able to choose family over work, right? And so fast forward to the second part of the story is I finally get back home. I'm working in the office, and man, this was another awesome gig. This was the best gig ever, right? I would go work in the office. I point behind me. It was about 5 minutes from my house, and I would go work in a real time. Oh, dang it! My camera just went off. Hold on, let me swap cameras.
I was wondering if it froze up, but it's been freezing up a little bit here and usually goes through.
It'll take, like, I could fix it in about 30 seconds, but I got to change out the battery.
No problem.
All right, we're back.
All right.
So fast forward, I got 2 years later, got this great gig where I was working 5 minutes from the house. I would go in there into this big operating center with all these TVs. It kind of looked like a trade center, but I was just watching these wells out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, and we were there to make sure nothing, like they didn't have a blowout. This job was created after the BP Macondo spill, right? And the blowout in the Gulf of Mexico, to survey these wells. But there was all this dead time. So I was able to spend, a lot of those guys are up there where they would be watching movies or YouTube or scrolling Instagram, right? And I was, again, continuing to build my business. And but I work for 12 hours up there and then have 12 hours off. And then I would do that for 21 days. And then after the 21 days, I would be completely off. Like I wouldn't have to do anything. It was the best. I was working the field schedule, but I was home every night, right? But here was the problem. I would go in from 2 p.m. and I wouldn't get home until 2 a.m. So my kids were not getting out of school till 3. And then I didn't get home till like 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm sleeping when they go to school. So I was completely missing them, right? And I was missing their sports. And this was the catalyst was I was missing all their sports. I built up my real estate company to where I could finally, again, I told you that it would have been about 2 to 3 years earlier, I didn't have the choice to leave, right? But now I built up and I had a choice, and I never forget it. I'm talking to my wife after a game. We're driving home, and I'm about to go back on my hitch for 3 weeks. I'm like, I don't want to continue to miss these games. I want to be able to coach my kids. I want to be there. I've got 3 boys at the time and a 4th one on the way. I'm like, I don't want to miss this stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to, and this was the kind of clarity I had. And I thought, I don't want to be on my deathbed 30, 40, 50, whatever years from now, and knowing that I missed all these important moments in games just so I could string out and play it a little bit safer and have that W-2 job. I'm like, I know I can't live with that. So I try to have that mindset, and that gave me the ultimate clarity. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be there for these games, whether my employer can take it or not. And I basically just let them know. And anyway, so that was why I ended up leaving. I'm like, I'm not going to miss these games, and rest is history.
So did you ever struggle, like, through all this? Have you had any struggles with mindset?
Yeah, I always believed in myself. So at least I know there's a lot of people who they're scared of fear, or they're scared of not knowing all the answers. I'm definitely a fail forward type of guy. Like, we'll figure it out. So that hasn't hurt me. But I think the biggest thing was like getting around the right people, right? And being in these masterminds and seeing other people doing it, and then kind of reaffirming what you're doing and that you're not unique. Cause I guess I wasn't surrounded by a bunch of entrepreneurs in my job or in my life growing up, but starting to get around them, it started to make it real for me. And I would get all this energy, and I would be like, all right, like this is the path. Right. So I think that was the biggest thing for me, is to kind of get that social proof, or maybe just that camaraderie and other people doing it. And once I started surrounding myself with other people who are doing it, it was like, again, it was fuel on the fire to where I'm like, all right, I can do this. And just that had even more belief in myself, right? I think that's just, it gave me even more confidence to go do it. And because I think in general, you're just like, I've always just trying to think of like growing up, right? Like I wasn't always the most confident person. I mean, I played football, I played quarterback, and I started to become more confident as I grew up, right? But I wasn't always just this like I would get intimidated really easily, like going up and talking to like a coach or a pretty girl or somebody. Like I would get embarrassed and be reserved, right? But now, and even going up to like Pace Morby, right, and talking to him now, I still like in deep down, I still get sort of butterflies and kind of intimidated. Like, oh, I can't talk to him. I don't want to waste his time. I'm not worthy of like a conversation with him. But as I've gotten more confidence and had a better mindset of like, hey, like there might be something I could help him with, or maybe if he helps me, I could go help other people. It just sort of gives you the confidence to go have the conversations with the right people. Because if you're networking and finding the right people, then you can help that many more people and open that many more doors.
So what were you doing to network when you first started? Were you meeting, were you going to local meetups like real estate, any kind of real estate meetup, or where did you spend most of your time? And who would you say would be your biggest influence when you first started?
Yeah, definitely the meetups. I mean, from the first ones back in Midland, I don't think I ever did any. Yeah, that's when I first found the first meetup was in Midland, Texas. I joined that RIA club. Joined a couple in Dallas, Fort Worth when I lived there, and then I've been part of some here in Houston. So those have always been great ways to meet people. And that first mastermind, right, with the game changers, those guys were great, right? I got to meet up with them. I got to be part of like Zoom calls, and we would meet up every 3 months. So that was, being around those people was great. And then, and then I've just kind of stepped it up and found bigger groups, right? I went from there to Collective Genius, and was a super high level group of investors, real estate specifically, doing it at a really high level and being around those guys. Yeah. And to answer your question about influencing and some of the people who've done it the most. Yeah. It's really been those high level mentors, right? Like, from Collective Genius, where you get to go to be in a room with people who are like Jimmy Vreeland, who was like, he was doing like hundreds of turnkeys, right? And I was just trying to do my first one. And these people who have thousands of rentals, these people who are doing like 150, 250 wholesale deals a year. And you see how they're doing it and how they're scaling and building their company. And then they're willing to share it all with you and just help you. And they genuinely like want to help you, and they'll answer your questions. Like, that was unbelievable, right? So that was my first taste. And then the other big part has been just being part of Sub 2 and everything with Pace Morby. He's been so giving and taught me so much, that, yeah, it's been a huge influence.
So where do you see yourself going? What do you want to do in the future with what you got going on? You also do lending, right?
Yeah. So we raise capital through my fund that is funding our deals. And that's on the roadmap, is eventually we'll raise enough capital to where we can actually deploy it on other people's deals. But right now we've just had such good deal flow in Wyoming. We're just lending in our deals. But I would love to explore that down the road. But that's sort of one big focus. And then the second one is, which I'm probably most excited about, especially like right now as we sit today here on February 20th, is our equity fund. Because I'm really excited because I see a big opportunity in the market right now, in Wyoming at least, where the market is still slow. And I know the market's slow a lot of places, but there's a lot of factors in Wyoming that are pushing growth and a lot of jobs coming, and not a lot of contractors and construction keeping up with demand. So I continue to see demand going up, right? And prices, because of interest rates, are still depressed. So I think it's an incredible opportunity to start buying. So that's why I'm like doubling down on our fund, because I'm like, hey, if I can go help more people, right? I want to get to that in a second, but one of my big goals is to help 100 people achieve their passive income goal, right? Okay. So if I can work with these people, we can go bring more capital, do more deals together, and take advantage of a sort of a down market. And let's say that it doesn't come back up and it doesn't heat back up like this summer, and we don't fix and flip for a home run. Well, you know what? I underwrite our deals so where we can keep them as rentals. Right? We're going to buy these and we're going to play the long game. And anybody who's been playing the long game in real estate has become ultra wealthy. Right? So I'm just excited to like do that with more people and take advantage of kind of a soft market right now.
So can you tell me about your first deal in Wyoming? How did you come across your first deal there and lock it down?
Yeah, I mentioned the first one that I bought with my dad, right? And then the second one, I think I went over where we kind of bought that second one and fixed it up. It was right by campus. But
Okay,
yeah,
so
I probably should share. Go ahead.
you were up there for both of those though, or then. How did you
Yeah,
start finding them like remotely? Did you find that more difficult doing it remotely?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because probably the third or fourth, I can't remember which one it was, but another one for the books. We bought a duplex that we were going to renovate. We bought it for 102,000. We're going to put like 80,000 into it, and it was going to appraise for 240. I was going to be able to use the BRRRR strategy because I was gonna, by the time it appraised out, and my loan was only going to be 180, and so I was going to be at like 75% leverage, could get all my money out. But here was the problem: we were not diligent enough in our due diligence, and part of the issue was we hadn't pulled off all the drywall and seen the framing. But what we found out was this house was so poorly framed that it was condemned by the city, so we had to tear it down. So now all of a sudden this $80,000 rehab is a tear down, new
Oh,
construction that I paid $100,000 to tear it down, which was overpaying back then for sure. So that was a tough one, right? But again, life lessons learned, and I was working with a small bank, but we figured it out, and I had a great relationship with that small banker, and we still do today. Because yeah, we had to completely adjust that loan, get new plans, and had to go get a variance to build a threeplex, and that's what we did. We built a new construction threeplex, and this is in Laramie, Wyoming, and I still own it today. It was a very stressful project, but we got to the end, and it's one of our best assets we own today.
all right. So hey, I came across you because I was on Andrew Arriaga's Power Hour, where you told us about the Revive method. What is the Revive method?
Absolutely. Yeah, one of my favorite strategies of many of them, right? There's a ton of creative strategies we use to buy our properties. But what I love about this one is if people have heard of a novation, it's like a novation, but we actually close on the property, right? And we change the deed and then we fix it up. So to explain the avatar or the seller that this works good for is it's somebody who's got a house that needs some work. And if you put some work into it, it would be worth considerably more. Right. So if you're kind of looking at numbers or you're underwriting it, a deal, is look for something where it has 50% equity, right? So let's say that the house, if fixed up, is worth 500,000, right? So as long as the purchase price plus, or as long as they owe less than 250, you're in business, right? And this could be a renovated property, because often, to give you easy numbers, right? Here's a house a good case study we did. Lady owes 180,000 on the house, right? But house needs $100,000 at least to fix it up, right? So, but she doesn't have 100,000. But if you put the 100K into it, this house is worth 500 potentially, right? On the market, on the aftermarket. But again, her having 100K to get there that's not happening, right? So what we do is we come and say, hey, why don't we put in that 100K, right? And then when we go to flip this house, we will do a profit share. But I'm very clear with the seller that when we sell the property on the back end, the first 180,000 pays the loan in place, right? The subject to loan. The next 100K goes to pay me and my construction company back. And then from then on, we profit split. That way, we're able to realize the full potential of this house, and we don't have to go sell it at a big discount, right? And that's the big kicker, right? Is because if that lady were to go sell it to a cash buyer, they're going to want a big discount because there's a lot of risk in a $100,000 flip, right? So it works really good for the sellers. It's great for us because we mitigate a lot of risk on it, right? Because we're going to get paid back what we have into it pretty much regardless, right? Because on that same deal, if our all-in cost, the first loan, 180 plus our rehab is 280 total, and it's worth 500, we're at like 50% of the loan. Like we're going to be able to move that house and get paid back. Right. So I mitigate a lot of risk on my side. I help the seller sell for more. And yeah, that's why it's one of my favorite strategies.
How did you come up with this? Was this just something you thought up, or is this was something you came across on another?
Yeah, it was, hearing about novations, which again, a novation is just set up for you to kind of partner with the seller and find an end buyer. But I'm like, there's these opportunities where I can put a lot of money into the property, but if you go put your money into the property and don't secure it by changing the deed, then then you're taking a big risk, right? That the seller, you're counting on that seller to come perform, and it's based on a contract. Versus on this one, we control the house because we take the deed, right? So it's really out of necessity because I'm like, there's these opportunities in Wyoming, and it was really out of numbers not working, right? Like I was being very conservative on my numbers because you know what? It also happened, and this is probably the better answer to your question, Todd, is this is when like interest rates were starting to go up, right? And we didn't know how high they were going. And I'm like, I still want to fix and flip, but I don't know what's going to happen with this market. So I know I've got to buy at a big, big discount. Well, not everybody was ready to sell at a huge discount at that point. So you had this gap between sellers, what they wanted, because they were still back in COVID mindset where they're getting everything, multiple offers. And you had buyers who were scared because of interest rates, and you had this big gap, right? So the way I closed the gap was, you know what? Let's structure this deal to where if the house sells where we both agree it's going to sell for, then everybody wins. But if it doesn't, at least I can still get paid back. And again, it's very transparent with the seller. Be like, if you can go do this yourself, that's okay. You don't need us, right? But it's like, I'm willing to do this deal, and I'm willing to go put in 100,000 or 150K or whatever the number is to get this thing fixed up. It's just they understand that I have to get paid back first, and that way I can mitigate my risk properly.
So how do your sellers usually handle that? Are they usually pretty accepting of that?
It depends, right? Like and it's really built on the relationship and our reputation, right? Like, because yeah, I mean, they're counting on me to go deliver and do a good job on it. And that might be some of them. They're like, hey, well, I've never seen you do work. Why would I want to do that? Right. But again, it's helpful when we can help solve a problem. Like for example, one of them now, like they need to move and they need 20,000 to move. And they want to be out of Wyoming, right? They're sick and tired of the cold. They want to move down to Arizona, right? But they don't have money to do it. But they also don't want to just liquidate their house and sell it at a big discount. So we're like, well, here's the solution. I'll give you 20K to move. We'll fix this up and then we'll pay you on the back end, right? So then they're like, okay, well, you know what? That makes sense. Granted, this guy could go do a poor job and it might not turn out well. But again, that's where our track record and the fact that we've been fixing and flipping and have a company and have reviews and have people who've done this, it definitely makes it easier.
And you're willing to partner with newbies to do it, right? To teach them and train them?
Absolutely. Yeah. Here's the cool thing about this. Typically, if you're going to go fix and flip in a new market, very, very, very risky, right? If you don't know the contractors, again, ask me how I know. I've done it, and it doesn't end well on the first couple, right? You're going to go through a learning curve regardless, almost. Unless you've got like boots on the ground, a solid person who can run that job for you, it's going to be an uphill battle, right? But the flip side, or the way to do it, is you go structure it as a revive method, because you're mitigating a lot of risk, because your total, again, back to that scenario where the loan is 180, I put in 100, my total exposure is 280, and this house is worth 500. There's a lot of room, and a lot of like mistakes can be made. You could have a bad contractor. You could miss on you might be new to a new market where you don't know, like one street to the next street could be a completely different value, right? And if I don't know that market intimately, I could make that mistake, right? But I can mitigate that risk this way. And that's why I love partnering with people, especially people who know the market, that are like, oh man, Casey, I got this deal. I'm trying to help the seller. They want to get out of this, but they want more money. That's when we can close the gap a lot of times. Like, well, let's do a revive method. I'll help you structure it. We'll do this together. You can actually be my boots on the ground. We could partner on this thing together, solve the seller's problem. You get it. The student gets to learn the process and make money. I get to use our company, right? And the agent gets to list it. There's just all these different people who win. So it's now you guys can see why it's one of my favorite strategies.
All right. So I know you got to get off. You got stuff you need to take care of. So one last question I want to say, ask, how could someone like me, I got a contractor, what do I need to do? What kind of house do I need to find to come with you to partner on a revive method?
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody has got a deal, just reach out to me. You know what? Just text me. I'll give you that, and then I'll give you my social media. But just 307-317-2494. Again, 307-317-2494. Just shoot me a text if you got a deal, right? But also, guys, hit me up on Instagram or YouTube. It's all the same. It's just my name, Casey Gregersen. And there you can go learn a little bit more about it. If you're like, I gave you guys the quick, like down and dirty 2-minute version of the revive method. I've got a bunch of videos sharing exactly how we do it. But if you are interested, text me. Or if you just want to learn a little bit more, go watch the videos. And then, yeah, if you got something, like we'll just take it from there, right? You can send me the message, we can get on a call and we can break it down. And even if like, I want anybody to reach out, like, just because you reach out doesn't mean we have to partner, right? If I need to walk you through the numbers, show you how to do it, or I can just point you to a video where I walk you through, like, just like Pace does, right? I want to be able to bring value and help people, because ultimately, whether that deal works out or not, there's going to be future ones. And again, what goes around comes around, and I'm just happy to help people out.
Cool. So I'll have all his information in the description of the video, so you'll be able to find it there too, all his links, and then you can watch the video and get his number. You must watch the video to get his number if you want to partner with him on deals. So I appreciate your time. Again, I know you got to get going, so I'm going to let you out and then go do what you need to do.
Awesome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for having me, Todd. You're doing a
Thanks
great job
for
with
having
this.
me, man. I appreciate it. I very much appreciate you taking the time to do so and all that. So, and I look to partner with you. Like I said, I have a contractor. I'm looking for a house for him right now. So hopefully we can find one and do
Good.
this.
That's another thing. Great way to keep contractors busy, right? And keep them engaged and keep them working, man. So I love it. Yeah. Send it over, Todd.
Cool.
Love to connect.
All right, man. You have a good evening and thank you for your time. I'm going to stop the recording now.